My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. After 12 years of grinding, saving every penny, and sacrificing everything, I finally achieved my dream of buying my first home. My reward? A court summons. From my own parents. They claimed I owed them $500,000 for a house that should have been my brother's. Anything. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. I never imagined the people who gave me life would try to take away everything I worked for. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, and hit that subscribe button to join me on this wild journey of family betrayal that changed my life forever. Growing up in Cleveland's middle-class suburbs, I always knew where I stood in my family's hierarchy. My brother Thomas was the golden child, the center of my parents' universe, while I was the reliable afterthought. Our modest two-story house on Maple Street was plastered with Thomas's sports trophies and academic certificates, despite the fact that most of them were participation awards. My straight-A report cards usually ended up in the recycling bin. Thomas was 3 years older than me, and from an early age, he learned that he never had to face consequences. When he crashed his first car at 16, my parents immediately bought him another one. When I turned 16, I was told I needed to save up for my own vehicle. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough from my part-time jobs at the local library and weekend babysitting to buy a used Honda with 150,000 miles on it. "Rebecca, you need to learn the value of hard work," my father would say, his voice stern, but not unkind. It was the same speech he gave me when I asked for help with college applications. Meanwhile, Thomas was on his third major change at a private university, fully funded by my parents. I still remember the night I received my scholarship letter from Ohio State University. I rushed downstairs waving the paper excitedly, only to find my parents consoling Thomas over his latest academic probation. "Not now, Rebecca," my mother said, barely glancing at me. "Your brother is going through something." Thomas shot me a smug look over my mother's shoulder. I retreated to my room and celebrated alone. College was a blur of classes, study sessions, and jobs. While my classmates enjoyed the full college experience, I juggled waiting tables at a campus restaurant weekend, shifts at a clothing store, and a work-study position in the computer lab. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, but I was determined to graduate debt-free. The tech industry wasn't exactly welcoming to women when I graduated, especially those without connections. I sent out hundreds of applications before landing an entry-level position at a small software company. The pay was barely enough to cover my expenses, but it was a foot in the door. I worked twice as hard as my male colleagues, stayed late every night, and volunteered for projects no one else wanted. My apartment was a tiny studio in a questionable neighborhood, but the rent was cheap. I shared it with a succession of roommates to cut costs further. Ramen noodles became both breakfast and dinner most days. Public transportation was my only option, adding 3 hours to my daily commute. Every penny saved went straight into my house fund. Meanwhile, Thomas bounced from job to job, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. Each time he got fired, my parents would cover his rent and bills until he found something new. When he decided to start a craft beer business that never produced a single bottle, they gave him $20,000 in startup capital that disappeared within months. "Your brother is finding himself," my mother explained when I expressed concern about their enabling behavior. "Not everyone can be as naturally disciplined as you are, Rebecca." That was the pattern. Thomas's failures were always met with support and understanding, while my successes were expected and unremarkable. When I received my first promotion after 3 years of 60-hour work weeks, I called my parents excitedly. "That's nice, honey," my mother said distractedly. "Did we tell you Thomas is thinking about law school?" As the years passed, I climbed the corporate ladder slowly but steadily. Each promotion brought a small raise, and every raise meant more money in my house fund. I tracked my savings, obsessively watching the numbers grow cent by cent. My friends got married, had children, took exotic vacations. I declined wedding invitations because I couldn't afford gifts and travel expenses. Birthday celebrations meant a single drink at happy hour prices. Homeownership became more than a financial goal. It was proof that I mattered, that my sacrifices meant something. Even as my parents continued to shower Thomas with financial support well into his 30s, I never asked them for help. Not when my car broke down and I had to walk to work for 3 months. Not when I needed emergency dental surgery that insurance wouldn't cover. Not when a roommate disappeared, leaving me to cover the entire rent for 2 months. Looking back, the warning signs were always there. When I mentioned my house hunting at a family dinner, my father frowned. Wouldn't it make more sense to wait housing prices could drop? When I showed my mother photos of properties I was considering, she pointed out every possible flaw. That kitchen is so outdated. That neighborhood isn't very nice. But I was so accustomed to their lukewarm response to my achievements that I didn't recognize their disapproval for what it truly was. I never imagined they would go from passive disapproval to active sabotage. But that's exactly what happened when I finally achieved the dream I'd been working toward for 12 long years. After 12 years of disciplined saving, I finally reached my goal: $100,000 for a down payment. In the Cleveland housing market, that was enough to secure a modest starter home in a decent neighborhood. I remember the day my savings account hit 6 figures. I was at work checking my bank account during lunch break when I saw it $100, 23.45. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes straight. The timing wasn't ideal. The market was hot with properties selling within days of listing, often above asking price. I spent weekends driving from one open house to another, watching disappointment after disappointment slip through my fingers. Bidding wars drove prices well beyond my budget. Houses with serious structural issues were selling for premium prices. "You need to be realistic about what you can afford," my real estate agent, Julia, advised after my 5th rejected offer. "Maybe consider looking in other neighborhoods, or at townhouses, instead of single-family homes." I expanded my search and adjusted my expectations. Instead of the 3-bedroom with a backyard I'd dreamed of, I started looking at 2-bedroom houses, and even condos. I calculated and recalculated my budget, trying to squeeze out a few more $1,000s for my offer. Then, on a rainy Sunday afternoon in April, Julia called. "There's a property that just hit the market," she said, her voice excited. "The owners are relocating for work and need to sell quickly. It's within your budget, but we need to move fast." The house wasn't perfect. Built in the 1962nd, it needed updates, and had a smaller yard than I wanted. But it was in a safe neighborhood, with good schools, had 2 bedrooms and 1.5 bathrooms, and most importantly, I could afford it. We submitted an offer that evening, slightly below asking price, but with minimal contingencies. I barely slept that night, checking my phone every hour for news. The call came at 6:30 the next morning. "They accepted, Julia," practically shouted. "The house is yours." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, inspections, and anxiety. Every time the phone rang, I expected bad news. The financing had fallen through, the inspection had revealed major problems, the sellers had changed their minds. But somehow, everything went smoothly. On May 15th, I sat at the closing table handshaking as I signed document after document. "Congratulations, homeowner," the closing agent said, handing me the keys. I gripped them so tightly they left imprints on my palm. I drove straight to my new house, my house, and sat in the empty living room, keys in hand, trying to process that this was real. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the scuffed hardwood floors and slightly faded walls. To me, it looked like paradise. That evening, I called my parents to share the news. "Guess what I closed on the house today? I'm officially a homeowner." There was a pause before my mother responded. "Oh, we thought you were still looking. You never mentioned making an offer." "I told you about it 2 weeks ago, Mom. Remember I sent you pictures?" "Well, I hope you had the inspector check the foundation carefully. Those older houses can have all sorts of problems," she said, ignoring my correction. My father got on the line. "Did you get a good interest rate? The market's pretty volatile right now." Not a single congratulation. Not one word of pride or excitement. I ended the call feeling deflated, but I refused to let them dim my accomplishment. This was my moment, the culmination of 12 years of sacrifice and determination. The next few weeks were consumed with moving and setting up my new home. I couldn't afford new furniture, so I scoured thrift stores and online marketplaces for bargains. I painted the walls myself, learning from YouTube tutorials. Every evening after work and every weekend was spent making improvements, installing ceiling fans, refinishing kitchen cabinets, laying new tile in the bathroom. A month after moving in, I invited my family for dinner. I spent the entire day cleaning and cooking, wanting everything to be perfect. They arrived an hour late, with Thomas trailing behind my parents looking bored. "It's smaller than it looked in the pictures," my mother said, stepping into the living room. "The neighborhood's changed since we were house hunting back in the day," my father added. "Used to be more exclusive." Thomas wandered through the house, opening closets and cabinets, without asking. "Plumbing looks old," he commented, flushing the toilet for no reason. "Probably going to give you problems." Throughout dinner, my parents peppered me with questions about the mortgage terms, property taxes, and insurance costs, as if they were looking for evidence I'd made a poor financial decision. Thomas barely spoke, scrolling through his phone between bites. As they were leaving, my mother paused at the door. "It's a nice starter home, I suppose. Of course you'll want something bigger eventually when you have a family." The fact that I was 32 and single, largely because I'd been too focused on career and saving for this house to date seriously, went unacknowledged. "Thanks for coming," I said stiffly, fighting back tears until their car pulled away from the curb. Despite their reaction, I was proud of myself. Every morning I woke up in my own home in a bedroom. I had painted myself under a ceiling fan I had installed with my own hands. No landlord could raise the rent or decide not to renew my lease. This was mine, earned through years of sacrifice and hard work. I had no idea that my parents were already plotting to take it all away. It was an ordinary Tuesday, 8 weeks after I'd moved into my new home. I was working from home that day, responding to emails at my kitchen table, while sipping coffee from my favorite mug. The doorbell rang just after 10. I assumed it was a package delivery, so I was surprised to see a man in a suit standing on my porch. "Rebecca Mitchell?" he asked formally. "Yes, that's me." "This is for you." He handed me a thick envelope and walked away without another word. Confused, I opened it as I walked back to the kitchen. The legal terminology was confusing at first, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Complaint summons court date, and most shockingly, the plaintiffs' names, Harold and Linda Mitchell. My parents. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile floor, as I sank into a chair trying to make sense of the document. According to the lawsuit, my parents were claiming that I owed them $500,000, more than double what I'd paid for my house. Their claim was bizarre and convoluted. They alleged that family money that had been intended for Thomas had somehow been misappropriated by me to purchase my house. They claimed that I had always known the family's financial support was meant to ultimately help Thomas buy a home, and that by purchasing one myself, I had stolen his opportunity. I read the document 5 times each time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. There was no family money. I had saved every penny myself, working multiple jobs, and sacrificing for over a decade. My parents had never given me financial support for the house, or for anything since I left for college. With shaking hands, I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cool and collected. "I just received legal papers," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "From you and Dad. Is this some kind of mistake?" "No mistake, Rebecca," she replied calmly. "We hoped it wouldn't come to this, but you left us no choice." "Left you no choice, Mom? What are you talking about? I bought a house with my own money." "Money you were only able to save because we supported you all those years," she countered, "and you knew that house was meant for Thomas." "What? I never knew any such thing." You never said anything about buying Thomas a house. It was always understood, she said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. Your brother needs stability. You've always been the independent one. You should have consulted us before making such a major purchase. The conversation devolved from there. My mother refused to acknowledge reality, insisting on this fictional agreement that had never existed. When I asked to speak to my father, she said he was too upset to come to the phone. Next I called Thomas, hoping he might be as confused by this as I was. He wasn't. You always have to be first at everything, don't you, Rebecca? He said, his voice dripping with resentment. You knew I was looking to buy a place. Since when? Last I heard you were thinking of moving to Colorado to start a ski equipment rental business. Plans change. Mom and Dad were going to help me get a house here, and you just had to swoop in and grab the perfect starter home right out from under me. Thomas, I had no idea. And how would my buying a house prevent you from buying one too? He scoffed. You know exactly what you did. I hung up my mind, reeling. Somehow in my family's twisted reality, my achievement had become a betrayal. My independence had become an act of theft. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated further. Extended family members began calling some confused others accusatory. Apparently, my parents had been telling people that they had been saving money for years to help Thomas buy his first house, specifically the very house I had purchased, and that I had somehow manipulated the situation to steal it from him. My Aunt Carol called, her voice hesitant. Rebecca, is it true you took money from your parents to buy your house? Absolutely not. I saved every penny myself. They never gave me a dime. That's not what they're saying. They claim they've been putting money aside for years, and you convinced the sellers to accept your offer instead of waiting for Thomas. The story made no sense. How could my parents have been saving for a specific house that only went on the market 2 months ago? How could Thomas have been planning to buy it when he'd been talking about moving to Colorado as recently as Christmas? None of it added up. Yet my relatives seemed willing to believe this fiction, rather than the simple truth I had worked hard and achieved something on my own. As the court date approached, I received increasingly hostile messages from family members and even some family friends. My mother's bridge club partners sent me disapproving emails. My father's bowling buddies gave quotes to the family gossip mill about what a disappointment I was. Thomas posted vague but pointed social media updates about family betrayal and stolen opportunities. I felt completely isolated. The house that had represented such achievement and independence now felt tainted, a battleground rather than a sanctuary. I found myself checking the locks repeatedly at night, half expecting my family to show up and demand entry. I stopped answering the phone unless I recognized the number. I took time off work because I couldn't focus, spending days sitting in stunned disbelief trying to understand how my parents could do this to me. The lawsuit itself was baseless. I knew that intellectually. They had no legal claim to my house, or to any repayment from me, but the emotional damage was devastating. The people who should have been proud of me, who should have celebrated my achievement, were instead trying to punish me for it, and they were turning our entire extended family against me in the process. I had never felt more alone in my life. Realizing I needed professional help, I searched for an attorney specializing in family law. After consulting with 3 different lawyers, I chose Stephanie Gardner, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who seemed genuinely outraged on my behalf. This is one of the most frivolous lawsuits I've seen in 20 years of practice, she said after reviewing the documents. But frivolous doesn't mean harmless. We need to take this seriously. Stephanie explained that while my parents had no legitimate legal claim, defending against even a baseless lawsuit required time, money, and emotional energy. They're banking on you caving under pressure, she explained. They want you to settle, maybe sign over the house, or take out a loan to pay them just to make this go away. Her retainer fee was $5,000, money I didn't have after emptying my savings for the down payment and moving expenses. I had to withdraw from my 401 Kelvin, incurring penalties and taxes, but I had no choice. This was now about protecting everything I'd worked for. As news of the lawsuit spread through my extended family, the messages grew increasingly hostile. My cousin Jennifer, once my childhood best friend, texted, "How could you do this to Uncle Harold and Aunt Linda, after all they've done for you?" My Uncle Richard left a voicemail. "Your parents are devastated, Rebecca. They were counting on that money for retirement. You need to make this right." It seemed my parents had been telling different versions of their story to different people. To some they claimed the money was for Thomas's house. To others it was for their retirement. To still others it was an investment they'd made in me that I was obligated to repay. The most shocking revelation came during the discovery phase, when Stephanie requested documentation of any financial agreements between me and my parents. Their attorney produced a series of emails and texts that had been edited and taken out of context to suggest I had agreed to buy the house for Thomas. "They're desperate," Stephanie assured me when I panicked. "This kind of evidence manipulation will backfire on them in court." But the real bombshell dropped during my parents' deposition. When questioned directly about the alleged agreement, my mother claimed they had been telling everyone for years that Rebecca is buying a house that Thomas will live in. "So, you were telling people that your daughter was purchasing a home for her brother?" Stephanie clarified. "Yes," my mother replied confidently. "Everyone knew that was the plan." "And did Rebecca ever agree to this plan?" "She didn't have to explicitly agree. It was understood." This explained so much. My parents had apparently been spinning a narrative in which I was the family's success story who would use my financial stability to support Thomas. In their version of reality, my accomplishments weren't my own. They were family resources to be redistributed, as my parents saw fit, primarily to benefit my brother. As the court date approached, my parents escalated their tactics. They began claiming they had paid for my college education, they hadn't covered my rent during lean years, never happened, and even provided the initial money for my house fund, completely false. They produced records of expenses they'd supposedly incurred on my behalf since childhood. Everything from school supplies to birthday gifts, all meticulously tallied, as if they were loans rather than normal parental expenditures. The pressure took its toll. I developed anxiety attacks so severe, I sometimes couldn't leave the house. I lost 15 pounds in a month because food had no taste. Sleep became elusive, with nightmares jolting me awake when I did manage to drift off. My work performance suffered, putting the job I'd worked so hard to secure at risk. Our first court appearance was a preliminary hearing to determine if the case had enough merit to proceed. I sat at one table with Stephanie while my parents and their attorney sat at another. Thomas sat directly behind them, smirking whenever I glanced in his direction. Judge Harriet Simmons, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the initial filings with a deepening frown. "I'm struggling to understand the legal basis for this claim," she told my parents' attorney. "You're alleging an oral contract, but your own filings indicate there was never an explicit agreement." "Your Honor, this was a family understanding," their lawyer argued. The plaintiff provided support to the defendant with the expectation of reciprocity. "What specific support are we talking about?" the judge asked. What followed was a litany of normal parental responsibilities. They had fed and clothed me, as a child purchased school supplies, taken me to doctor's appointments. They even listed emotional support as a financial contribution. Judge Simmons looked increasingly skeptical, but allowed the case to proceed to give my parents the opportunity to present evidence of actual financial contributions, specifically related to my home purchase. But she warned their attorney, "I expect to see documented proof of financial transfers or explicit agreements. Family understandings are not legally binding contracts." As we left the courthouse, a local reporter approached asking about the case. My parents eagerly gave an interview portraying themselves as victims of their ungrateful daughter. The next day, a small article appeared in the local paper, under the headline, "Family Feud Over Property Rights." It didn't name us, but anyone who knew our family would recognize the situation. The public exposure added another layer of humiliation. I stopped going to the grocery store in my neighborhood, afraid of running into someone who had read the article. I declined invitations from the few friends who hadn't already taken sides, unable to face their questions, or worse, their pity. My house, once my proudest achievement, now felt like a prison. Each mortgage payment was a reminder of the battle raging around me. I considered giving up signing over the house to Thomas just to end the nightmare. But every time that thought surfaced, another would follow. Why should I sacrifice everything I'd worked for because of my family's dysfunction? I had never fought back against my parents' favoritism before. I had accepted the unequal treatment, the lack of support, the expectation that I would succeed without help, while Thomas received endless assistance. But this time, they had gone too far. This time, I would stand my ground. 3 months into the legal battle, I hit rock bottom. I was sitting at my desk at work, staring blankly at my computer screen, when an email notification popped up. It was from my company's HR department, requesting a meeting to discuss my recent performance issues. That was the final straw. I put my head down on my keyboard and began sobbing uncontrollably. "Rebecca, are you okay?" A gentle hand touched my shoulder. It was Rachel Anderson from the marketing department. We had worked on a few projects together but weren't particularly close. "I'm fine," I managed hastily, wiping my eyes. "Just allergies." "Those must be some serious allergies," she said skeptically. "You've been looking miserable for weeks. Do you want to talk about it? I'm a pretty good listener." Something about her genuine concern broke through my isolation. Before I knew it, I was pouring out the whole story in the empty conference room from my childhood, as the less favored child to the current lawsuit. Rachel listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to outrage. When I finished, she shook her head in disbelief. "That's the most messed up thing I've ever heard. And I come from a family with plenty of dysfunction." "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted. "I'm drowning in legal fees, my job is in jeopardy, and my entire family thinks I'm the villain." "First things first," Rachel said decisively. "You need a support system. No one can go through something like this alone." She pulled out her phone and began typing. "My brother Daniel works at Legal Aid. He's not a family law specialist, but he knows people who are. Maybe he can help with your case pro bono or reduced fee." "I already have a lawyer," I said. "She's good but expensive." "Then maybe he can consult with her, offer additional perspectives without charging you. It's worth asking," she continued typing. "And you're coming to dinner at my place tonight. No arguments. You need to eat a proper meal and talk to someone who doesn't think you're a horrible person." That dinner was the first time in months I'd felt human connection without judgment. Rachel's husband Mike was as warm and welcoming as she was, and they didn't press for details but let me share what I felt comfortable discussing. When I left their house that night, I had a full stomach and a marginally lighter heart. True to her word, Rachel connected me with her brother Daniel, who offered to review my case files for free. After consulting with Stephanie, he suggested some additional strategies for countering my parents' claims. "They're trying to frame this as a family understanding and implied contract," he explained. "We need to demonstrate not only that no such understanding existed, but that their behavior over the years contradicts their current claims." This led to a deep dive into my financial history. I dug up old bank statements, tax returns, scholarship award, letters, student loan documents, anything that would prove I had funded my education and supported myself without parental assistance. Daniel also suggested I join a support group for people experiencing family estrangement. "This isn't just a legal battle," he said. "It's an emotional one too. You need to process what's happening with people who understand." The online support group became a lifeline. Hearing stories from others who had been scapegoated, manipulated, or betrayed by family members helped me realize I wasn't alone. More importantly, it helped me recognize patterns in my family dynamics that I had normalized over the years. "What you're describing is classic golden child, scapegoat dynamics," one group member commented after I shared my story. "Your brother is the golden child who can do no wrong while you're expected to achieve without recognition and support the family system without complaint." Another significant step in my journey was starting therapy. Rachel recommended her therapist, Dr. Lisa Bennett, who specialized in family trauma. During our first session, I broke down while trying to understand why my parents would turn on me so viciously. "I just don't get it," I sobbed. "What kind of parents sue their own child for buying a house?" "Parents who see their children as extensions of themselves, rather than as independent individuals," Dr. Bennett suggested. "From what you've described, your parents view you and your brother as characters in their narrative, not as separate people with your own lives and choices." Through therapy, I began to unravel the complex web of expectations, resentments, and dysfunctional patterns that had defined my family relationships. I discovered that my drive for independence and financial security had been shaped by the lack of support I'd experienced growing up. I had never expected help because I had learned early on not to count on my parents. A breakthrough came when Dr. Bennett asked me to bring in childhood photographs and memorabilia. Among the items I found in an old storage box was a letter from Ohio State University regarding a small college fund my parents had apparently established when I was born. I had never known about this fund, and had certainly never received the money. "This is interesting, Doctor," Bennett said, examining the letter. "Have you asked your parents about this account?" I hadn't, but Daniel suggested we include it in our discovery requests. The response was illuminating. The account had been emptied when I was 18, but the money had been transferred to Thomas for his first year at private university. This discovery led to others. With Daniel's guidance, we subpoenaed my parents' financial records related to educational expenses. The documents revealed a pattern: resources ostensibly set aside for both children had consistently been redirected to Thomas alone. A college fund in my name had paid for his freshman year. A small inheritance from my grandmother, which should have been split between us, had entirely gone to cover Thomas's debts. The most damning evidence came from my mother's email archives, which she was required to provide as part of discovery. In an email to my aunt 5 years earlier, she had written, "Rebecca will be fine on her own. She always figures things out. We need to focus our resources on Thomas, who needs more support." Another email sent just weeks before I purchased my house read, "Rebecca mentioned she's looking at houses. I don't know why she's in such a rush to buy when the market is so competitive. We've always planned to help Thomas get settled first." Nowhere, in any of the documents, was there even a hint that I was expected to buy a house for Thomas, or that family money had been provided to me for that purpose. On the contrary, the evidence consistently showed that my parents had never intended to help me financially, while continually supporting Thomas. Armed with this evidence, Stephanie and Daniel helped me prepare a countersuit, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress and asking for my legal fees to be covered by my parents. It was a drastic step, one that would likely sever any possibility of reconciliation. But I was past the point of hoping for family harmony. Now I just wanted justice, and to be left alone. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Stephanie asked, before filing the countersuit. "It will escalate the conflict significantly." I thought about all I had discovered over the past months, not just the legal evidence, but the deeper understanding of my family's dysfunction and my place within it. I thought about the years I had spent seeking approval that was never going to come no matter what I achieved. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time I stood up for myself." The day of the final court hearing arrived 11 months after I had received the initial summons. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and dark wood, its formality, adding weight to an already heavy day. I wore a conservative navy blue suit, my hair pulled back neatly, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Rachel sat in the gallery behind me, a silent support system. My parents and Thomas sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, my mother, in a modest dress that screamed respectable matron, my father uncomfortable in a suit that looked new. Thomas smirked at me when our eyes met, and I quickly looked away. Judge Simmons entered, and we all rose. She had reviewed all the filings and evidence beforehand, her expression giving nothing away as she called the court to order. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to clarify the issues before this court. The The plaintiffs, Harold and Linda Mitchell, assert that their daughter Rebecca Mitchell owes them $500,000 based on an alleged family understanding that she would purchase a home for her brother Thomas. The defendant denies any such understanding existed and has countersued for legal fees and emotional distress. Is that an accurate summary? Both attorneys confirmed it was. Very well. Plaintiffs, you may present your case. My father was the first to testify. He spoke about how they had always supported both their children equally, a claim contradicted by the financial records, and how there had been a clear family understanding that I would help Thomas once I was established. Rebecca always knew Thomas needed more support, he said, his voice cracking with what seemed like genuine emotion. She was the responsible one, the successful one. We counted on her to help her brother get on his feet. My mother followed, doubling down on the narrative. We talked about it for years, she insisted. Rebecca knew that her success was a blessing for the whole family. We expected her to help Thomas secure a stable home, once she was in a position to do so. Their attorney tried to present their edited texts and emails, but Stephanie objected, presenting the complete, unedited versions that told a very different story. Judge Simmons frowned as she compared the two sets of documents. Thomas testified next, his usual swagger, somewhat diminished by the formal setting. My sister always knew I was going to buy that house, he claimed. Mom and Dad had been telling everyone for years that Rebecca was saving up so I could finally have a place of my own. Stephanie's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Mitchell, did your sister ever explicitly agree to buy you a house? Well, not in those exact words, Thomas hedged. Did she ever transfer any money to you or your parents for the purpose of buying you a house? No, but did you ever visit the property in question before your sister purchased it? No, I didn't know about it, until Thomas stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. Until what, Mr. Mitchell? Stephanie pressed. Until my parents told me Rebecca had bought it, he admitted reluctantly. So you had never seen this specific house, never discussed this specific house with your sister, and were unaware it was even on the market until after she had purchased it. Yet you claim she bought your house. Thomas glared but had no answer. When it was my turn to testify, I felt surprisingly calm. Months of therapy and support group meetings had helped me see the situation with clarity. I saved for 12 years to buy my home, I stated simply. Every dollar came from my own earnings. My parents never contributed to my down payment, never helped with my education, never provided financial support for my housing at any point in my adult life. There was never any discussion, implied or explicit, that I would purchase a home for my brother. I presented documentation of my savings plan, bank statements showing regular deposits, often from multiple jobs, tax returns confirming my income sources, spreadsheets tracking my progress toward the down payment goal. As for the claim that I somehow took money intended for Thomas, I can only say that no such money ever came to me. The financial records show that my parents did establish accounts in my name when I was young, but those funds were redirected to Thomas when I reached adulthood. If anything, money intended for me went to my brother, not the other way around. Judge Simmons asked several pointed questions about my relationship with my parents and brother, whether I had ever been asked to contribute financially to Thomas's support. I hadn't, and whether my parents had ever explicitly told me they expected me to provide housing for him. They hadn't. After hearing all testimony, the judge called a brief recess to review the evidence once more. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat quietly with Stephanie and Daniel, too anxious to speak, while across the room my parents huddled with their attorney, occasionally glancing in my direction. When Judge Simmons returned, her expression was stern. I've reviewed all the evidence in this matter, and I'm prepared to rule, she announced. This case presents a troubling example of family dynamics gone awry. She turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, the court finds no evidence whatsoever of any agreement, implied or explicit, that your daughter would purchase a home for her brother or repay you for ordinary parental expenditures. On the contrary, the evidence shows a pattern of financial support directed toward your son, while your daughter was left to fend for herself. My mother started to protest, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. Furthermore, the court is disturbed by the apparent manipulation of evidence and the misrepresentations made to family members and this court. The lawsuit against your daughter appears to be nothing more than an attempt to control her independent financial decisions and redirect her resources toward your son. She shuffled her papers. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Additionally, the court finds merit in the defendant's counterclaim for legal fees. The plaintiffs shall reimburse the defendant for all reasonable legal expenses incurred in defending against this frivolous lawsuit. My father's face reddened. My mother began to cry. Thomas stared at the floor. Miss Mitchell, the judge continued, looking at me directly, while the court sympathizes with the emotional distress you have experienced, the claim for damages beyond legal fees is denied. I encourage all parties to seek family counseling to address the underlying issues that led to this unfortunate situation. With a sharp rap of her gavel, it was over. After nearly a year of turmoil, accusations, and legal maneuvering, the truth had prevailed. My house was unquestionably mine. My parents would have to repay the thousands I'd spent defending myself against their baseless claims. Yet, as I stood to leave, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what could never be recovered. The illusion that my parents loved me unconditionally, that family meant support and celebration rather than competition, and control. Rachel hugged me as we left the courtroom. "It's over," she whispered. "You won." But we both knew what I had really lost. The legal victory brought resolution but not closure. As I drove home alone from the courthouse past the manicured lawns of my neighborhood that had once represented such achievement, I felt hollow. I had won the case but lost my family. The house was undeniably mine, but the home I had dreamed of creating felt tainted by conflict. For weeks I moved through life mechanically, going to work, coming home, eating, sleeping, repeating the cycle without joy or purpose. The congratulatory messages from Rachel, Daniel, and my support group members bounced off me like raindrops on a window. I had spent so long fighting that I didn't know how to live in peace. One Saturday morning, about a month after the final hearing, I was sitting on my back porch with a cold cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. "Rebecca, it's Aunt Marion, your mom's sister." I tensed immediately. Aunt Marion had been conspicuously silent throughout the legal battle. "Hello," I said cautiously. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steady. "I should have reached out sooner, but I didn't know what to believe. I've talked to your mother, read the court documents, and done a lot of thinking. What they did to you was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't stand by you." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to say more. "I've been estranged from your mother before, you know," she continued. "We didn't speak for 8 years after she and your father got married. She's always had this way of creating narratives that suit her purposes regardless of reality." This was news to me. I had always assumed my extended family was as close-knit as they appeared at holiday gatherings. I didn't know that. No one talks about it. That's part of the problem. The family secret is that there are no real secrets, just stories we agree not to question. She paused. "I'd like to see your house sometime if you're open to that. No agenda, no family politics, just an aunt who'd like to celebrate her niece's achievement." That visit became the first step in rebuilding a life beyond the lawsuit. Aunt Marion brought a houseplant as a gift. Something that grows and thrives with proper care, like new beginnings, and genuinely admired the improvements I'd made to the house. She shared stories about my mother's childhood that helped me understand how my parents' dysfunctional patterns had developed without excusing their behavior toward me. Most importantly, she modeled what healthy family relationships could look like: supportive, without being controlling, proud, without being possessive, loving, without keeping score. Gradually, I began to fill my house with new memories untainted by the lawsuit. Rachel and Mike became regular dinner guests. My support group friends visited for coffee or wine on the patio. I started hosting monthly book club meetings in my living room. I resumed the home improvement projects I had abandoned during the legal battle, but with a different perspective. Instead of trying to prove my worth through perfect renovation projects, I embraced the imperfections. The slightly crooked tile backsplash in the kitchen became a conversation piece. The uneven paint line in the guest bedroom remained uncorrected, a reminder that humans create homes, not machines. With Dr. Bennett's guidance, I worked through the complicated grief of family estrangement. "You're mourning not just the loss of these relationships," she explained, "but the loss of what they should have been, what you deserved them to be." As months passed, I developed new holiday traditions to replace the family gatherings I no longer attended. Thanksgiving became Friendsgiving at my house with Rachel, Mike, Daniel, and others bringing dishes and laughter. Christmas morning meant volunteer work at the local shelter, followed by an open house for friends without family nearby. The financial aspects gradually resolved as well. My parents paid the court-ordered legal fees, sending a check through their attorney with no note attached. I used some of that money to establish an emergency fund, ensuring I would never again have to raid my retirement savings for unexpected expenses. Work stabilized once the stress of the lawsuit diminished. My performance improved, and I received a small promotion and raise, which I used to accelerate my mortgage payments slightly, while still maintaining a balanced life. 18 months after the court case concluded, I received an unexpected email from Thomas. "I've been doing some thinking," he wrote. "While I still believe Mom and Dad meant well, I recognize that the situation with the house was handled poorly. I'm sorry for my part in it." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the harm done, but it was something. I responded briefly, accepting his partial apology without opening the door to further discussion. My parents never reached out at all. Through therapy and reflection, I came to understand that the lawsuit had been the culmination of lifelong family dynamics, not an isolated incident. My independence had always threatened my parents' narrative about their children, Thomas, as the needy one requiring endless support, me as the self-sufficient one requiring none. By achieving homeownership without their help, I had inadvertently challenged the roles they had assigned us. "Some families can't tolerate members who don't follow the script," Dr. Bennett explained. "Your success outside their control was intolerable to them because it contradicted the story they'd been telling themselves and others." 3 years after moving in, my house finally became the home I had envisioned. Not because the renovations were complete, there would always be projects to tackle, but because I had made peace with its complicated history. It was no longer the battleground of a family war, but the foundation of my chosen family, the physical embodiment of resilience and self-determination. On the anniversary of the court decision, I sat in my backyard garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The flowers I had planted were blooming the vegetable beds, promising summer harvests. Inside, the dishes from dinner with friends were still in the sink, a happy reminder of connection, rather than a chore to rush through. I had learned hard lessons through this journey, that family is defined by behavior, not blood, that independence can be both a shield and a bridge, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish but necessary, that homes are built with more than money and materials. They're built with boundaries, courage, and self-respect. Most importantly, I had learned that, while we can't choose the family we're born into, we can choose the family we create through friendship, mutual support, and shared values. My house had become more than property. It was the tangible proof that I was worthy of occupying space in the world on my own terms. If you've ever had to stand up against family who didn't support your success, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you handle it? What did you learn? Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to claim their achievements without guilt. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, the family you choose is every bit as real as the family you're born into.